quiet. Good evening. I'm Michael Halloran, the provost at William & Mary, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's 15th Tack faculty lecture. Huge crowd. I'm delighted at that. We have competition. The weather is absolutely gorgeous, and I am told that there is a basketball tournament going on and that some games are being played, well, starting in around 6 minutes. I will not be streaming, in case you're wondering. I will not be streaming during the lecture. The Tack faculty lecture was endowed through the generosity of Carl and Martha Tack, both of them class of 78, and both of them and their families with deep and long connections to the college. Carl currently is a clinical professor of finance at the business school and co-director of the Boley Center for Excellence in Undergraduate Finance. Carl and Martha, you were there. I can't see anything anymore. But if you could just let's give you a round of applause. I really want to thank you for your vision and your generosity in establishing this lectureship series, which really has brought so much intellectual richness to our campus and the community. The lecture series, as I like to say, was founded on a very simple premise, that the intellectual energy we have as a university comes from the creative work of the faculty who conduct research and lead students in the quest for new knowledge and fuller understanding. And so we have an obligation not to hide our light under a bushel, but rather to let it shine brightly. And tonight, for the 15th time in this series, we will do just that. Ronald Schechter, tonight's speaker, received his bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan, and then continued his studies at Chicago for his master's and at Harvard for his PhD, at the latter of which he worked under the supervision for his dissertation under the very distinguished scholar Simon Schama. He joined the faculty here in 1997, and he is currently a professor of history whose research focuses on early modern Europe. Professor Schechter has been a visiting fellow at the Ruprecht Karls Universität in Heidelberg, at the Shelby Cullum Davis Center for Historical Studies at Princeton, and the Pawlowski Fellow at the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies. He is a celebrated historian of France, whose first book, Obstinate Hebrews, Representations of Jews in France, 1715 to 1815, won several prestigious awards. Now, it's worth noting that his career as an eminent scholar of French history did not begin auspiciously. He confesses now that he failed 9th grade French. Now, he recovered from that traumatic experience. He initially turned to German, a language in which he is now fluent, and eventually had the courage to return to French in graduate school, and I think we will all acknowledge that we are very grateful that he did so. He's the author also of The French Revolution, The Essential Readings, and the translation and editor of Nathan the Wise by Gotthold Ephraim Lessing with related documents. Now, Professor Schechter is also very interested, and this is unusual for most academics, in reaching out to a very broad audience. In 1914, he published this really marvelous graphic history entitled Mendoza the Jew, Boxing, Manliness, and Nationalism, a graphic history, where he introduced a broader audience to the issues of French national identity and anti-Semitism. His most recent book, A Genealogy of Terror in 18th Century France, is a return to a more standard academic study of the terror during the French Revolution. This evening, he will tell us a remarkable tale of one of the most captivating characters of the French Revolution in his talk entitled The Secret Library of Marie Antoinette, revealing the inner life of a conflicted queen. Ron, please come on up.
Thank you, Michael, for that very generous introduction and informing an audience of maybe 400 people, friends, colleagues, students, and perfect strangers that I failed French in the 9th grade. So I want to start with a question. What sentence is associated with Marie Antoinette? It's something that most people think that she said. I'll give you a hint. It starts with let and it ends with cake. So, that's right, let them eat cake. That's actually a test that I give my students. You know, it's not that hard. The hard thing is really getting into William and Mary. Okay, so Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette, there she is, there she is. She never said, let them eat cake, okay? So if there's one thing, well, there are actually two things that I want you to get out of this, this lecture, but and I'll tell you the other one in a second. So she never said, let them eat cake. And think about it, only a very stupid person would think that people who are too poor to afford bread would eat cake, right? And Marie Antoinette was not stupid. In fact, she was rather smart, right? And so there are two things. There are actually a number of things that I want you to take away with you, but if you fall asleep during the lecture, I want you to remember these two things that I'm going to tell you right now. Okay. One is that Marie Antoinette didn't say let them eat cake, and two, she was smart. I want you to go and tell all your friends that Marie Antoinette didn't say let them eat cake and that she was smart. And if you want to know how to slip this into a conversation, it's actually kind of easy. Let's say your brother or sister tells you that your niece just got into William and Mary. So you can say something like this: oh, I always knew she was smart, just like Marie Antoinette, who, by the way, never said let them eat cake, right? All right. So, all right, Marie Antoinette never said let them eat cake. So why do so many people think that she did? And here I have to say, and I hate to say it, that historians are largely responsible for this. Not that they think she said let them eat cake. They know she didn't, but they've portrayed her as stupid. All right, here's some of the epithets that they've used to describe Marie Antoinette: empty-headed, feather-brained, dizzy. Right? And have you noticed how sexist these terms are? I mean, really, when was the last time you heard somebody refer to a man as dizzy? Right? And so I'm going to try to prove that this isn't the case, that Marie Antoinette was smart. And my first piece of evidence, actually my main piece of evidence tonight, is that she loved books. Okay? She had over 10,000 books. And while most of them were for display, right, art objects really more than something to read, there were a couple thousand books that she had that she could only have acquired because they corresponded to her interests, because they instructed her, because they gave her pleasure. And I'll talk about those books later on in the lecture. But first, a little bit of background about Marie Antoinette. She was born in Vienna. She lived in the Schönbrunn Palace. And her mother was Maria Theresa, who was the Empress of the Austrian Empire. Now, this term is a little bit misleading because if you think of Austria today, it's a small country. But in the 18th century, the Austrian Empire was actually quite big. Right? And if you look at the dark red part of that map, you'll see that's actually what Austria was in control of. Now, Marie Antoinette also had 16 children. 16. And I asked the mothers in the audience, can you imagine? 16 children. And here's a portrait, a family portrait. And if you look all the way in the back, there's a little herd of children back there. And that's actually, there are only 10 children in that portrait because sadly, 6 of them died in childhood, which is actually a pretty good record for 18th century Europe when about half the people died in childhood. So why did Maria Theresa have 16 children? Well, the reason was that she wanted to marry them off to foreign rulers. Right? That was her strategy. It was a diplomatic strategy. It was a way of making friends and influencing kings. Right? And it was an effective strategy. It was an effective strategy, and it was most effective with Maria Theresa's youngest daughter, Archduchess Marie Antoinette. So Marie Antoinette was meant to marry the Crown Prince of France, somebody named Louis, who was going to eventually be Louis XVI, but he's not Louis XVI yet. He's the heir to the throne. And before before she went to the Palace of Versailles, she had to get ready. She had to prepare to cut a good figure at Versailles. So what she had to do was, first of all, she had to learn deportment. Okay? So she had to learn how to walk and stand with the majesty of a princess and then a queen, right? Because if she was sort of slouching and lumbering across the floor, she wouldn't have cut a very good figure at Versailles. So she learns deportment. I want to thank Jenny Davey for providing it. Oh, Jenny's like, don't say that, don't say it. At the Special Collections Research Center for providing me with this illustration from a children's book. So she's learning deportment, but she also has to learn some academic subjects. And among these are French and French history. Now, she already knows French and speaks it actually pretty well, but she needs to refine it so people at Versailles don't make fun of her. And she also knows German and Italian. No big deal for a 12-year-old girl to know 3 languages, right? That's not very empty-headed to me, I don't think. So she knew 3 languages. But as I said, she had to learn to polish her French, and she had to learn French history. And so her mother hired a tutor, right? And what do you expect? She wasn't going to send her to middle school, right? Because the other kids would have taunted her, for being an archduchess. And they would have said things like, "Archduchess, archduchess, you're still in your mother's clutches," right? Kids that age can be so mean. And so she got her a tutor. There's the tutor. His name was Abbé Vermont, but I'm going to try to keep the names out of the lecture insofar as it's possible. So we're just going to refer to him as the tutor. But an abbé was a kind of priest. And this isn't actually Abbé Vermont. I don't have a portrait of him, but it's kind of a generic illustration of an abbé, right? So what did he do? So he's teaching her these subjects, and he writes to a man named Merci Argenteau, but we're just going to refer to him as the ambassador. He writes to the Austrian ambassador to France, right? So the tutor is in Vienna. He starts off in Vienna, and he's tutoring the Archduchess Marie Antoinette. And he's writing these letters, and he's very excited about his pupil. And he says that she remembers everything that he's teaching her, right? Everything. And that she's very interested in history. And she's not just learning names and dates, but she's analyzing history. She is reading about previous rulers and the situations they were in, and she's saying what she would have done in their place. This is a very high level of historical analysis. It's really AP history, right? And Marie Antoinette got a 5. Right? And she would have gotten into William and Mary. Right? So she's doing quite well indeed. And here, actually, so let me go back for a second. The ambassador, I want to give a shout out to Morgan Davis, the music and arts librarian at the Swim Library. I don't know if she's here tonight, but she helped me find out where this portrait is. Because this is splashed all over the internet, but nobody says where the portrait is. And I want to be able to say where the portrait is, because when I write a book and I give the citation, I don't want to say I found it on Wikipedia, right? So where is this? Where is this portrait? And I was trying desperately to find out where it was. I asked a historian who had written a book about this guy. I said, "Where's the portrait?" He says, "I don't know, I'll look into it," which is a polite way of saying I won't look into it. And so he doesn't know, but Morgan puts me on the trail. She gives me some clues that I follow up, and I can actually find out where this portrait is. And it turns out that it's at this castle in Belgium, and it belongs to a family called the Outremont. So I guess the idea, if you want to see the portrait, is you make friends with the Outremont, and maybe they'll let you stay in their castle, which is kind of nice. Okay, so Okay, so Vermont, the tutor is writing to Vermont, and he's praising Marie Antoinette. And this is one of the many letters that he writes to Vermont. I think there are about 180 letters like this. This is in the Austrian State Archives in Vienna. And I didn't go there. I had them do scans of these letters. And they're very interesting because they reveal, sorry about that. I actually had this really well rehearsed. And so I knew that I wasn't going to give away any of the punchlines, so to speak, but here it is. I seem to be doing that a lot. But in any case, so what does he say? He tells the ambassador that one day he wanted to show off his pupil, the Archduchess Marie Antoinette. He wanted to show her off to her mother and convince her that she was a good student in history. And she spoke for 2 hours about history. And Maria Theresa was very impressed, which is saying a lot because she was very hard to impress. And of course, you'd probably notice that that's from the same children's book. And this is from, again, Jenny Davy, thank you very much. This is from a book called Moi and Marie Antoinette, and it's from the perspective of a dog, from the perspective of her dog. And it's one of 10,000, more than 10,000 books in the Swaim Library and special collections. It's in the Cynogetica collection, and if Cynogetica isn't an everyday word for you, it means books about dogs. All right. So they go to Versailles. Marie Antoinette marries Louis and goes to Versailles. And she takes her tutor with her. And her tutor gives her these books to read. Well, they read them together, actually. She's 14 years old. And these are actually pretty difficult books. I've read all of them. I actually can say, I think with some confidence, that I am the first and only historian ever to have done Marie Antoinette's homework. So let's start with a book called the Bagatelle Morale, which is Moral Trifles. It's the one all the way here on the right. And I'll only talk about 2 of these 4 books. So Bagatelle Morale is a book that is full of satires. And the object of these satires are the church, the Catholic Church, and the aristocracy. And one of the chapters is a fictional letter from a French nobleman to an English woman who has come to France to marry a French nobleman. And so the letter criticizes this English woman for not behaving like a French noblewoman. And he says, you've been here for over 6 months and you still love your husband, right? That's very gauche. And he said, and what's more, you haven't accumulated large debts. And when you go to dinner, you arrive on time and you eat everything that's on your plate without complaining. Right? He says, you're not interested in the latest fashions, perfumes, hairstyles, and you're not, he says, you have migraines. You don't have migraines. You don't get the vapors. Right? So what are the vapors? The vapors kind of a psychological disorder combined with some physical symptoms. It's kind of a combination of depression and anxiety and bipolar syndrome. And so, French ladies are supposed to have these characteristics. And she says, you don't even have the vapors or migraines. And so he says, you really need to, and you're not afraid. You're not afraid of mice, spiders, flies, and thunderstorms. Get with the program here. So this is satire on the nobility. And there's another satire on the nobility. It's another fictional letter. And it's from the perspective of a Turkish rabbi. And he is writing to a Jewish friend who has fled from Spain, from the persecution in Spain, to go to a remote island. And the rabbi's in France, and he writes to his friend about the strange customs that the French have. And he focuses on the nobility. He says, do you know that nobility in France is based on blood rather than virtue or merit? And did you know that the French nobility have this strange practice where a noble son of a noble father, can be a judge if his father was a judge, and it doesn't matter what kind of qualifications they have. And did you know that in France, the nobles leave the entire estate to their firstborn son, as opposed to the Jewish practice, which is more equitable, of dividing the inheritance equally? And what's more, the French noble women are quite interesting. They have this thing called the vapors. They do this very unnatural thing, which is sending their infants out to wet nurses to be fed, right, rather than breastfeeding them themselves. And he says, oh yes, and they wear rouge. What's up with that, right? And so another way of satirizing the nobility. And I'll just give you a little trifle, right, from the Trifles, from the Moral Trifles, which is that the author predicted that someday the world would be ruled by women. And that at that point, there would be peace on earth because women are more peaceful than men. So these are his satires. And then there's a book called the Synonyms Français, or French Synonyms. And I'm not going to go into detail about why it's called that. That doesn't really matter for our purposes. But the difference between that author and the author of the Moral Trifles is that this author of the French Synonyms doesn't satirize. He goes straight for the jugular, right? And he rails against French society and government and religion, right? So he starts off by criticizing the Catholic Church. And he says that the papacy is corrupt and that priests plagiarize their sermons, and that he's noticed that the mendicant monks are suspiciously corpulent, right? They look better fed than the people they're begging alms from, right? So this is just a corrupt church. Now, this is a big deal in 18th century France, to make fun of the church. Or actually, he's not even making fun, but to attack the church. Because the Catholic Church was the only church allowed in France. And the Catholic Church had an ideology that supported absolute monarchy, right? It said that God chose kings, and that the subjects of the kingdom couldn't do anything about it, even if their king was bad, right? That they had to wait for him to be judged by God. So this is all very convenient for the king. And so it's a big deal to attack the Catholic Church. So he also attacks the institution of monarchy, right? So the future Queen of France is reading a book that attacks monarchy as a form of government, and he favors a republic, right, in which citizens elect their own leaders. And then finally, his social positions are very radical. He says that the rich prey on the poor, and he's not just talking about the aristocracy, but people with money, that they prey on the poor, and that profit is theft, and that and he supports what he calls the principle of natural equality, right? It's a very radical idea in the 18th century, one of the ideas that led to the French Revolution. And then get this, he calls for the redistribution of wealth in society, right? He's a socialist. This guy is a socialist, before the word socialist has been invented. So this is rather odd, right? So why would a tutor be teaching the future Queen of France that the church is bad, that the rich and basically French society is corrupt, and that the institution of monarchy is bad, right? And that a republic is a preferable system of government, right? That's very strange. Why is he doing this? Well, in a certain sense, I think we can think of him as a kind of 18th century Robin Williams in an 18th century a dead poets society, right? Standing on desks and ripping pages out of books and telling his students to think for themselves, and all of this behind his conservative parents' backs, right? So is this a Robin Williams figure? Is this a Dead Poet Society figure? Well, I have other ideas about why the tutor did this, and I'd be happy to talk about them in the Q&A, but I don't really think they matter. For the purposes of this talk, what I really want to emphasize is that Marie Antoinette, at the age of 14, at that impressionable age, was being exposed to radical ideas. Okay, so the ambassador finds out about all of this from the tutor, and he reports back to Maria Theresa, right, who's his boss. And he writes 300 letters to her, and 295, I counted them, by the way, and 295, this is something that historians do, 295 of them mention Marie Antoinette, right? He's pretty proud of himself, right? And so he's writing to Marie Antoinette, he's saying that, and so why is he doing this? So one of the things he's particularly interested in is her reading. And he writes again and again about how often she's reading, how long she's reading at any one sitting. Sometimes he writes a little bit about what she's reading. For my purposes, it's kind of frustrating. I wish he would talk a little bit more about that, but he gives some interesting tidbits. So why is he so interested in what Marie Antoinette is reading? Well, because the Empress is. And why is she interested? Well, because she believes that a well-read wife can influence her husband. And can especially influence Louis, because she doesn't think much of Louis. She doesn't. She actually thinks he's a drunkard. And she may have been right about that, right? And the ambassador said, no, Louis isn't a drunkard. He just seems to be a drunkard because he's so slow-witted. So that's good news to Maria Theresa, because it means that Marie Antoinette is going to be able to influence it. Yeah. Okay, so this is one of the letters. This is the very first letter that Maria Theresa wrote to her daughter. And Maria Theresa was a very demanding mother. She made a lot of, and she was actually very critical of her daughter. It's actually quite sad. But she, in the very first letter that she wrote to her daughter, she said that her daughter should be careful, that she should read a lot, and that she should be careful of bad books, right? So on the one hand, she's telling her you have to read a lot, but she's treading a fine line here, because she says you don't want to read bad books. And she says bad books, she says the French have these books that are thoroughly pleasant, but pernicious with regard to religion and morality. Well, I don't know about you, but that sounds more like a recommendation than a deterrent, right? I mean, imagine you tell your kids, you bring them a list of websites, and you say, these sites are fun, but I don't want you to go there because they're immoral, right? I mean, what do you think is going to happen, honestly? So Marie Antoinette, I think it'll come as no surprise that she seeks out the kind of books that her mother really, really, really doesn't want her to read. Okay. So before I talk about that, I want to say that she also reads serious books, right? She's interested in history. She reads French history, of course. She also reads Roman history, and she reads English history, right? So this is one of the books that she reads. She reads David Hume's History of England, right? This is 3,300 pages long. Now, I don't believe she read the whole thing, but she read some of this book, And I have evidence of that because the ambassador writes to the empress. He says that she's reading the book. She writes to her mother saying that she's reading the book, which in and of itself is kind of weak evidence because she could be placating her. But I've reason to believe, and you'll see later on in the lecture why this book sort of is I guess, sort of a leitmotif. It's a thread throughout my lecture. So she's reading some of this book that's 3,300 pages long. So this is what a 3,300-page book sounds like. This is how we can tell that it's a long book, right? Volume 1. Right. Volume 2. Volume 3. Oh no, is that Carrie Cooper, Dean of University Libraries? I'm in trouble now.
Professor Schechter, you're throwing books on the floor. What do you have to say for yourself?
I'm sorry. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Carrie Cooper, Dean of University Libraries. So she's reading the history of England, and so yes, she's not going to read all of it. Of course, I don't know many people. I don't believe many people have read the whole history of England. I'm trying, and I'm like maybe a fifth of the way through the first volume. I don't think I'll ever get through with it. So, I confess this to you because this is a talk about secrets, and I know that you can keep this secret, along with the thing about failing French in the 9th grade. So, okay, so she's, what's more interesting to me than whether Marie Antoinette read all of Hume's History of England is that she read any of it, right? Because it very much does not, by the way, this is in its shrink wrap, right? So I haven't damaged anything. And they're not library books, by the way, they belong to me. So the fact is that she read some of this book. And that really does not fit with the image of Marie Antoinette as an empty-headed, feather-brained, what was the other one? She was empty. Thank you, dizzy person. You guys are on top of it. I appreciate that. Okay, so I just wanted to get that out of the way to show that she did read serious books. And then she also read the kind of books that her mother didn't want her to read. And one of these, the first evidence of this that I have is from 1773, and the ambassador writes to Maria Theresa that Marie Antoinette is reading a series of books that her lady-in-waiting has given her, and it's called the Bibliothèque de Campagne, or country library, and it has 24 volumes in it. Eventually, there would be 60 volumes, and Marie Antoinette would collect them all, right? So she started off with the 24 that came as a gift, and then she would acquire the rest of them. There would be 60 all in all. So, okay, so what's in the Bibliothèque de Campagne? It's mostly novels, and novels are dangerous for women because, first of all, they often have erotic scenes in them. Some of these books are pretty steamy, actually. But actually more to the point, perhaps more dangerously, is that they often featured a protagonist, a female protagonist who married for love. Now, that might not seem like a big idea, a serious, subversive idea to us today, but in the 18th century it was a big idea because a woman wasn't supposed to marry the man she loved. She was supposed to marry the man her parents told her to marry. And this was particularly a problem with the nobility, particularly a critique of the nobility because the parents of noble women were particularly interested in having their daughters marry other nobles. Now, this was precisely the situation that Marie Antoinette was in, right? She didn't marry Louis out of love. She married Louis because her mother told her to. And whether she came to love him was beside the point. She was supposed to make babies with him, even if the act of producing them was repellent to her. I'm being vague in my language in case there are children in the audience. Are there any children in the audience? Any kids in the audience? If there are, do what your parents say and don't read bad books, don't go to bad websites. So novels are dangerous. Another reason that novels are dangerous is because there's another common narrative to novels, which is that a nobleman makes all kinds of conquests of women. He goes from woman to woman, he seduces them, he ruins their reputation. Sometimes he gets them pregnant, and they become single mothers, which is a very bad thing in 18th century France. And sometimes they end up in convents, which is very bad, right? It's very bad. These writers are all anti-clerical. They're all against the Catholic Church, which means they're all against the monarchy. So it's interesting that the future Queen of France has these books, and that she likes them so much that she orders more. So there are a lot of and very often the nobility and the clergy are the butt of jokes, right? And there are 2 volumes that are entirely devoted to jokes, and they're often about the clergy and the nobility. And my star student, Olivia Vanderwood, who's sitting right there and who handed you your program, wrote me a fabulous paper about jokes in 18th century French literature, and really deepened my understanding of humor in 18th century French literature. So thank you for that, Olivia. Now, not all of the books in the country library were novels. Some of them were instructive books. Right, so for example, here's a book called The History of Monkeys and Other Curious Animals. Right? And there's a lot in there, what you would expect, what the animals look like, what they eat, where they live, and so on. But there are subversive messages that are hidden in this book. Right? So for example, there's a story in the section about the imitative faculties of monkeys. And it involves a priest who had a pet monkey. And whenever the priest went to church, he would put the monkey in a cage. Now, one day when the priest was preaching, the monkey got out of the cage and went into the church. And while the priest was making his sermon, and he was gesticulating, to make his point, the monkey did this too, right? And the congregation, like you all, started to laugh, right? And this made the priest even angrier. It made him so angry that he started to denounce the congregation for not showing him proper respect. And guess what the monkey did? Right, and this made the congregation laugh even more, right? And so eventually the priest had to leave the pulpit without finishing his sermon. Now, is this just an entertaining story about a priest and a monkey, or is it a story actually about the humorlessness and the self-righteousness of the Catholic clergy? There's another interesting section of The History of Monkeys and Other Curious Animals, in which the author says that people and animals are equals, right? We are not superior to the animals. We're equal to the animals. So doesn't that mean that we're equal to each other? Right? And that actually hadn't occurred to me until my friend Arthur Knight, my colleague and friend Arthur Knight, pointed it out to me. Arthur, are you here? Is it? Okay. Good. And so thank you, Arthur. So that's a radical idea. And then finally, here's a really, really interesting idea. The author says that animals have souls. Okay, animals have souls. That's very interesting. So if animals have souls, where do they go after they die? So for example, if your dog is the bestest doggy in the whole world, right? I've heard you all talk to your dogs. If your dog is the bestest doggy in the whole world, right? Does it go to heaven? And what about bad dogs, right? The kind of dogs that chew up your shoes and soil the carpet. I know, aren't they cute? But they're bad. Do they go to doggy hell? It's funny, right? Dogs afraid of vacuum cleaners, that's what they get in doggy hell. Funny, right? And so, right, so, and does it even make sense to talk about bad animals and good animals? So, you know, if you follow the logic to its conclusion, are there good mice and bad mice? Are there good ducks and bad ducks? No. And aren't you supposed to believe certain things to get into heaven? Like, aren't you supposed to, in the 18th century, big deal, believe in the Trinity, believe in the Trinity. Now, what if a turtle doesn't believe in the Trinity because it doesn't know what that is? Okay, this turtle knows what the Trinity is. But the vast majority of turtles, I would be willing to bet, do not know what the Trinity is. Smart Alec, William and Mary student, you know, what can I say? It's a tortoise. I can't tell the difference between a turtle and a tortoise. All right, I confess. So, okay. So if animals can get into heaven without being particularly good and without believing specific things, well, what about people? Can't they? And if they can, then what's the use of priests and religion, right? So you start off with what sounds like a kind of innocuous claim that animals have souls, and you end up making a very, very subversive point. Now, there's another book in the collection of the Country Library, which, by the way, the Country Library is going to end up in the secret library. You'll see. There's another book in the Country Library that is called Gammaology, or of the education of women destined to become married, to get married. Sounds like a kind of innocent title, but the author denounces celibacy, right? He says, get married. Whatever you do, get married. Do not be celibate. Do not become a nun. Don't go into a convent. Because he thinks that celibacy is unnatural and unhealthy, and that it gives you bad skin. That's what he says. I'm not making this up. And so he says, don't go into a convent. He also says that convents are useless, they're a drain on society. And I guess the nuns inside don't have good skin. So, all right, so that's Gammaology. So these are kinds of books that are in the Country Library. And I have reason to think that Marie Antoinette liked them because she kept ordering them. She kept asking her librarian. She had a personal librarian. She kept asking him to order these books for her. Now, a lot of the books that Marie Antoinette owned and that I think were meant not for display but for reading were in the Petit Leon, which was a kind of getaway for Marie Antoinette. It was sort of a mansion. It was a little palace compared to Versailles. And it was, and she would go there with a small group of friends when she was tired of the stifling etiquette and the plotting that were a daily occurrence in the palace, the big palace of Versailles. So she would go there with a group of friends. And there were some interesting, very radical books that she had in that library. And so I'll just give you a couple of examples. This is a book called The Year 2440. The author is Mercier. And in this novel, in the future, all of the social problems that are present in France will be solved. And this is a way for the author to criticize France in his own day. And this is just a list of the things that the author attacks in his own day. And I won't read it out to you. I'll just ask you to take a look at it, take a few seconds, let it sink in, and pay particular attention to what's at the bottom of the list, right? Monarchy. In the palace of a queen of France. And at this point, she's queen. Before that, she was married to the crown prince. Now, Louis XV has died, and Louis becomes Louis XVI. He never goes, by the way, into the Petit Leon. He never sets foot in it, which is good for Marie Antoinette because she's got books that he, as the king of France, has actually banned. Right? He has this very strong system of censorship, and these are kind of books that were so bad that not only did the censor ban them, but the authorities forbade the newspapers and magazines to even publish reviews of them because they just hoped that these books that people would forget about these books. Okay, so another book in the Petit Leon library, which had 2,000 books, was another scandalous book called Dangerous Liaisons. And it was about a decadent couple of nobles who coldly plot the ruin of an innocent young woman. And maybe you know the film version of this, starring John Malkovich and Glenn Close. So you guys have heard of Glenn Close before, right? She was an alumna of William and Mary, and she left her papers to William and Mary. And so you can look at them in special collections. You just have to wash your hands and put your coat on hang up your coat, put your backpack in the locker and all those things. Show your ID. And you can read the papers, the actual term papers that Glenn Close wrote in her classes. So it's pretty cool, right? Okay, so that's what, so those are some of the books that she has at the Petit Leon. And then in some of the books in that palace are in her boudoir. Right? I like to say boudoir. Right? Don't you? Boudoir, it sounds so naughty. She has these books in her boudoir. And this is what I'm calling the secret library. There are about 550 volumes in there. And in there is the Bibliothèque de Campagne, the country library, and a number of other books. Some of them are on that little bookmark that you have attached to your program with titles like The Philosophical High-Class Prostitute and The Perverted Peasant Woman. And a book by Voltaire, a great philosopher. And so, a whole different sort of range of books. And by the way, the books that are steamy are an indictment of the nobility because it's always a nobleman, a corrupt nobleman who is behaving in this way. Anyway, so she has these books in her library. And she has, so what else does she have in there? I'll give you an example of another book that she has in there. And you probably know, some of you will know the story. It's called The Marriage of Figaro. Oh, sorry, this is the catalog that tells me what was in the library, right? And there's the Bibliothèque de Campagne. And so she also has, she has other books in there, including The Marriage of Figaro, right, which was a play before it was a Mozart opera. And it was actually a very radical play. Because Figaro, the hero of the play and then the opera, is a servant. And the Count in the novel is kind of a bumbling idiot, but he's arrogant, he's pretentious. And at one point, Figaro just loses his temper. And he says, you think you're so special, right? You have these privileges, you have power over commoners. What gives you this power? What gives you these privileges? You've only taken the trouble to be born. Right? Ouch. Right? That hurts. That hurts a Count's feelings. Louis XVI said that the play was detestable and that he might as well have the Bastille burned down or torn down before he could let this book be, this play be performed. So, okay, so these are some of the books in Marie Antoinette's private library. And here you have The Marriage of Figaro on one of the pages in the catalog. This is the catalog again of the Boudoir Library. Now, it turns out that Louis XVI was prophetic when he talked about the destruction of the Bastille, because on July 14, 1789, revolutionaries stormed the Bastille. And it was coincidentally Bastille Day when this happened. So 4 months later, some armed women, market women from Paris, marched on Versailles, right? Many of them were armed, and they forced the royal family to move to Paris where they would be under the watchful eye of the people. And The royal family couldn't help it, they had to comply, and so here they are. This was the Tuileries Palace. If you go to the Tuileries now, it's a garden. There's no palace, and there's sort of a story. It didn't get destroyed in the revolution, but eventually did get destroyed. So this is their new residence. They're kind of under house arrest. It's a nice house arrest, but it's house arrest. And while they were there, Marie Antoinette ordered, she sent for her books to be brought to this new palace. And among the books that she asked for were the books in the boudoir library, the secret library. And you can tell that from another catalog, and this is called the Queen's Catalog. And in red ink, it says the items listed in red have been placed in Her Majesty's boudoir, right? And you can't get more explicit than that, right? These books are in red ink so that the Queen can know exactly where they are. She's had the boudoir library, the secret library, moved to the Tuileries. And so here you can see, if you look in the second column, that has the number of volumes of each one of the titles, and a little bit like about 40% down that column, you'll see the number 60. And that means that there were 60 volumes in the Bibliothèque de Campagne, the country library, which means that she really did like those books, and she had them moved from Versailles. So they're living in Versailles, and while they're there, the Queen orders more books, not from Versailles, but she just acquires more books for her library there. And the reason I know that is because there's another catalog from 1792, and if you compare the one from 1789 to the one from 1792, you'll see that in the 1792 catalog, there are new books, ones that weren't in the previous catalog. So I'll give you just a couple of examples. There was one book by Montesquieu called Persian Letters, and that was a book that excoriated really many aspects of French society, including monarchy, and he really was kind of closet Republican. He doesn't come right out and say that France should become a republic, but he gives hints. And what else did she acquire while she was there? What else did she acquire? I'll just show you. Okay, it was Letters of a Peruvian Woman by Madame de Graffigny. This was a feminist novel about a Peruvian woman who comes to France, and the novel really exposes the oppression of women in France. Okay, so she acquires these books while she's in the Tuileries. And unfortunately, she didn't have that much time to enjoy her books, because on August 10th, 1792, revolutionaries stormed the Tuileries Palace, arrested the royal family, put them in prison, this prison here called the Temple Prison. It's a big fortress. And the whole royal family went there, the king, the queen, their children, their two children, who are 14 and 10, a 14-year-old girl, a 10-year-old boy, and the king's sister, Elizabeth. And while they're there, they don't have a lot to do but read, right? So there are the children, Marie Therese and Louis Charles, whom royalists would call Louis the 17th, after Louis the 16th. I hope I'm not giving anything away, but he dies. And so they all read while they were there. And here is, right, so Madame Elizabeth is there as well. So they all read while they're there. And I'll make sure that I don't give away my punchline here. Okay, so they're all reading. The king likes to read aloud. And one of the things that he reads aloud, would you believe it, is Hume's History of England. And yeah, it's true. They're all he probably learned about it from his wife. And one of the passages that he reads is the part where Charles I of England is executed in the English Civil War, right? So there's the beheading of Charles I, Right? So it's very sad. And then Louis XVI himself goes to the guillotine not long after, January 21st, 1793. This leaves the Queen. This leaves the Queen and the royal family that's remaining in prison with little to do but read, right? And so here's some of the books that the Queen likes to read. And the evidence here comes from her jailer, who says that she liked to read travel literature, for example, Cook's Voyages, Captain Cook's Voyages translated into French. She also liked to read sort of fantasy, 1001 Nights, right? And she also read books by an English author named Fanny Burney. English majors will know who Fanny Burney was. She wrote satires of the English gentry, right? Evelina, for example, in this book, Cecilia, which could easily have been translated to the French, to a critique of the French nobility. Okay. So Marie Antoinette is now a widow. At a certain point, she's alone. Her children are taken from her. Her children are taken from her. Her sister-in-law Elizabeth is executed on May 10th of 1793, and she's alone. She's alone, and I'm gonna have to look at my notes here for a minute, see where I am. So she's alone while she's in the Tuileries, and she continues to comfort herself by reading. Okay. Now, there was a strange likeness, I think, between Marie Antoinette and the revolutionaries who killed her. Right? There's a really strange irony here, because Marie Antoinette had real problems with the organization of French society, just as the revolutionaries did. She had problems with the Catholic Church, so did the revolutionaries. She had problems with the nobility, so did the revolutionaries. She seems to have had problems with absolute monarchy and read books that advocated a republic. Well, the revolutionaries established a republic. But as we've seen, Marie Antoinette was not in a position to express her ideas, still less in a position to enact them. Whereas the revolutionaries were. That's exactly what they were doing. And what's ironic here is that the revolutionaries who railed against privilege actually had the privilege of being able to express and to enact their ideas, whereas Marie Antoinette was not in that position. Now, Marie Antoinette was alone at the end of her life. Her husband was dead. Her children had been taken from her. As I've mentioned, her sister-in-law had been executed. And in her loneliness and in the face of death, she looked to books to console her. And the last record we have of her relationship to books was a request that she made to her jailer for, can you guess? David Hume's History of England. Yeah. She read David. Now, I can't say that she read that because all we know is that she requested it. So we don't know whether the jailer complied. And I think we can imagine if she did get a chance to read this book, that she, like her husband, would have read the part about the execution of Charles I. Right. Now, books did a lot for Marie Antoinette. They instructed her, they satisfied her curiosity. They gave her pleasure, they comforted her, they distracted her. And Hume's History of England may have taught her how to die. Right, so there you have it. Marie Antoinette wasn't stupid, she was smart, she read books, she had ideas. wasn't in a position to express those ideas or to enact them, but she had those ideas nonetheless. She had an inner life. So, this lecture is called The Secret Life of Marie Antoinette, right? It's about secrets. And so I've shared some secrets with you. There are literally things about Marie Antoinette that only we know, right? The people in this room. There are things about Marie Antoinette that only we know. Only we know some of the content in her homework assignments. Only we know the content of the country library. So isn't that thrilling? That nobody else in the world knows what you know now. And it's thrilling to me. Right? It's the thrill of historical scholarship, and it's one of the reasons why I do what I do. So before we move on to the Q&A, I want to thank, well, first of all, I want to just show you this slide here, right? There's Marie Antoinette. So before we move on to the Q&A, I want to thank Martha and Carl Tack for establishing this lecture series, the Lion Gardner Tyler Department of History, for nominating me for this prestigious lecture, the provost for entrusting me with this charge, Carrie Cooper, a firm yet fair judge of people who mistreat books. Morgan Davis, the music and arts librarian who helped me, sort of sent me on the way to find that mysterious, where that portrait of the ambassador was located. Jenny Davey, who the exhibits manager at Special Collections, who found those wonderful illustrations from the children's books, from the Cynogetica, right? That's a term that you probably use in your daily life now. Olivia Vanderwood for handing out the programs and for having written that wonderful book about humor in 18th century French literature. Arthur Knight for pointing out to me that if we're equal to animals, then we must be equal to each other. Uta Schechter, my wife, for putting up with me and for not being jealous of my obsession with Marie Antoinette. And the incomparable Tack team for working behind the scenes to make these lectures possible, to make things run smoothly, and to keep me on schedule. And to all of you for patiently listening to my thoughts about Marie Antoinette. Thank you very much.
Ron, that was splendid. I often say that each of the Tack lectures gets better than the previous ones, and I think you've done a superb job in this tradition. But it's not over. It is time for Q&A. So if there are hands up, there are microphones going around. So Bob, we'll start with you since I can see you.
Did Marie Antoinette did she leave any marks in the books indicating ideas or phrases that really knocked her socks off?
That's my fantasy, really, is to find, no, it truly is, to find, oh, and you don't know how many books I've leafed through at the Municipal Library of Versailles, which is just, anybody can go there, by the way. If you are visiting France, just go out to Versailles. You can go into the Municipal Library there. You know, they have students studying for their baccalaureate exam. They have kids having stories read to them. It's really just, it's like the Williamsburg Regional Library, only it has Marie Antoinette's books in it. And I've leafed through them. I've gone through her version of David Hume's History of England, which comes to 18 volumes in the French version. I'm going there through the French National Library's sort of special collections department, and I'm just leafing through them. Please, Marie, please write something in the margins, and I haven't found anything. The one thing that I think would be really, the one book that I think is most likely to have something in it, is really interesting, is that Maria Theresa sent the ambassador a book and told him to give it to Marie Antoinette so that she could read it aloud to the king, right? And this was a radical book. It's a very subversive book that was banned by the king, oddly enough. And they made the claim that the king had the right to name his own successor, right? And this would have been a very inflammatory thing to do and would have caused probably civil war in France. And if I can find that book, I believe that there will be some marginalia. Now, I could be in complete denial about this, but I think that that would be a place to look. But no, to my dismay and sadness, I have not found any marginalia in any of her books.
Is it a question to her left?
You said that you did all of her homework, so you read all of the books that she read. Which one was your favorite of all of the books you had to read?
Oh, yeah. That's a really interesting question. I like the moral trifles, because I was laughing. I was laughing at that. The French Synonyms, which I talked about, was, it was dead serious. And so I was kind of shocked by it, but I didn't enjoy reading as much as I enjoyed reading the moral trifles. And if I could talk more about that book, it's about 10 chapters, and they're all as good as the 2 chapters that I talked about tonight. Thank you for that question.
I think I see a question near the front in the middle.
I was under the impression that all reading material was taken away from the family in the Temple prison. So I'm, very shortly after they arrived there, I'm very surprised. Have you found evidence that she actually had any books in the Temple?
That's right. That's right, because her jailer, really, the head guard at the Temple prison, reported to, it was city officials that he was responsible for. And it's in his reports. He mentions these books that I talked about, The Voyages of Captain Cook, The 1001 Nights, the novels by Fanny Burney, trying to think of others. Oh yeah, and well, it's a different document that says that she asked for the history of England shortly before her trial. Wherever you got that, I'd like for you to show that to me so that when I write my book, I can say that author was wrong. Because that's what we historians like to do. We like to say people are wrong.
I think Tom.
Hi, Ron, that was fascinating. In all of the volumes that you found here and have looked at, do any involve music in any way? I mean, music is often an opera at this point is an extremely high and flammable flashpoint for what's going on between, in fact, between the members of the royal family, in the Querelle de Buffon and other things like that. And it's a little more public kind of display of maybe a disagreement. So I was just wondering if anything along those lines might be there.
Well, thanks for that question. There isn't a lot in the country library, but there is a lot. Right? Marie Antoinette was an accomplished musician, amateur but accomplished. She was quite good at the harpsichord. She played the harp. She also sang, and so she has scores of music. Right? There are scores of Marie Antoinette's music. They're in the French National Library. And the first thing I'm going to do tomorrow, I've spent a lot of time on this lecture, I don't know if you could tell, but the first thing I'm going to do tomorrow, after I order a new computer, which has died after 7 years, is order scans of those scores from the French National Library, because there are about 50 of them. And some of them are opera scores, which are pretty lengthy, of course. And I'm going to have in this book that I'm writing, I'm going to have a chapter about music. And I hope that you'll help me, because I'm not because I'm one of these people who only knows the text, right? Who only knows the lyrics, and can't see really what's going on in the music itself. And as you mentioned, there was a conflict going on. It was kind of like, I guess it's sort of like, I don't know. I don't follow football, but I hear a lot about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Is that what they're called? And the Boston Patriots or the New England. I don't know. So you have to pick one, right? And in France, you had to pick. You had to pick Piccini or Gluck, right? You couldn't like both of them. And Marie Antoinette liked Gluck because he was her harpsichord teacher in Vienna. And when he came to Paris, he put on these operas. And in fact, when you came in tonight and you heard music, you were hearing an overture to one of Gluck's operas. I forget which one. So Marie Antoinette went to the opera. She might have met the man she had an affair with, Count Fersen from Sweden. Ooh, Marie Antoinette had an affair. So she went to the opera. But what interests me about these scores is that it's hard for me to know which of the books I talked about Marie Antoinette actually read. I can only say that there are themes that go throughout them so that I don't have to say exactly which ones she read to be able to say what the secret library, what it conveyed. But when I read the music with text, I can say she read that because she played it, right? So thank you for that question. Music is absolutely integral to this story.
Yeah. Susan, and then over there, but Susan first.
Ron, thank you for that wonderful talk. One of the other great bodies of work that's challenging the church at this point are the scientific publications like Diderot and Buffon. Do you see any of that in Marie's library?
She does, yeah. She has Diderot. She has Buffon. She has a complete set of Buffon. And so she does have science in her library. She has what we would consider to be pseudoscience, for example, Mesmer, right, who was a big deal at the time and talked about something called animal magnetism, which was supposed to be able to cure illnesses and so forth. And so she was interested in him. She was interested in electricity. I don't know if she had anything by Franklin, but she might have. There's so many books in her collection, as I said, over 10,000, that it's hard for me really to go through all that, much less remember what's in there. But yes, definitely she was interested in science, and those books, some of them show up in the Trianon library. I don't believe she has any in the secret library, apart from the book about monkeys, which I guess is zoology.
Did you come across any evidence that she tried to convince her husband to reform the monarchy based upon her readings? And if successful, she might have salvaged it?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't think she did. As I said, there was this book, this very controversial book that was banned by her husband, that she was supposed to read to her husband, that said that the king had the right to name a successor. But as I said at the end of the lecture, I don't think Marie Antoinette was in a position to express her ideas, still less to act on them. Now, she did what her mother wanted her to do. She sort of insinuated herself into the ministries. And she would say, I like this minister, I don't like that minister. And most historians think that she had some influence over politics, and I think they're right. But no, she couldn't have. She wasn't in a position to say, I think even to her husband, you know what, I think we should abdicate, or I think I like a republic better than a monarchy, or even that, although to a certain extent she did, to a certain extent she wanted the king to compromise with a group of judges that considered themselves to be legislators. And we're hoping to turn France into something like a limited monarchy along the lines of Britain. And some of the kind of manipulating that she tried to do of ministers, take this minister, don't take that minister, it involved supporting those voices that were calling for really an end to absolute monarchy. So no, she couldn't. So in a way, I think she did help to reform the monarchy. But that was really about as far as she could go. So that's a great question. Thank you for that.
There's a question over here. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm really interested in the secrecy aspect of this. So she had librarians, or at least a librarian that would, I guess, gather these books for her, take care of them, keep track of them. But of course, as we know, some of them were banned in France by her own husband. So she just had a group of people that just knew what she was doing and kept this secret for her?
That's all I can say. I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense of all this, is that she had some trusted people, right? And just like I trust all of you with the secrets that I've revealed to you. No, actually, I want you to tell the secrets. Right? I'm sure you can keep a secret, but I want you to tell everybody. Because two things will happen. One is that you'll repair Marie Antoinette's reputation, which is that's one of the very most important reasons why I'm writing this book. And also, you'll sound incredibly smart when you tell people what you know about Marie Antoinette. But yeah, so okay, so right. So how did she maintain secrecy? Right? How did she keep this from getting out? I don't know. It's a great question because there were so many rumors at Versailles. There was such a big rumor mill that I frankly don't know how she did that. I think she really, she trusted her librarian and she trusted the people who went to the Petit Leon with her. And they had an interest in keeping the secret as well, because they were also probably reading those subversive books. And they also had an interest in being close to the Queen because, she was in a position to do favors for her. So I think that there was really, I guess it was a pretty complex set of circumstances that came together that kept this thing secret. But that's a great question. Thank you. Yeah.
Richard.
Thank you, Ron, for a really wonderful talk. I have really two questions. The first is, when the royal family left the castle on their way to Varennes, where they were eventually arrested in the famous Nuit de Varennes, any indication of what books she took with her?
No, I wish I knew. Right, so here, for those of you who aren't familiar with this story, in 1791, after it became clear that the royal family that the king was going to lose power, right, that the revolutionaries were kind of whittling away at his power. They didn't execute him at the beginning of the revolution. I think a lot of people think that they did, and that the storming of the Bastille immediately ended with them, caused the fall of the monarchy. But the king was hanging on for a couple of years. And at one point, when it became clear to him that he was going to lose his power, he fled with the rest of the royal family. They got into a carriage, and it was sort of the stuff of like bouffe opera, where they're in disguises and they try to get out of France, and they end up getting caught. So what was in that chariot? Oh, how I wish I knew.
There's another myth that's associated with that. The myth is that the night before, Marie Antoinette went to her perfumer and had her bottles filled, because in those days, you couldn't go out and get a bottle of perfume as they're made today. So she would take a generic bottle and have it filled by a perfumer, because she wanted to have things for the journey.
Right.
The myth even gets more complicated and more ridiculous, is that those people who were trailing the family, as they were moving toward Varennes, were able to trail the scent of Marie Antoinette. Okay.
I did not know that.
Well,
I didn't even know that it was a myth. But
no, and it wasn't.
You're the expert on perfume. I know.
No, it wasn't even the smell of the cake that she took with her. No, not at all. But it's again one of these myths to show that she was, dizzy and feather-brained and only interested in appearance, which is absolutely not true, as you proved.
Right. Thank you.
One more question.
Really? Is that all?
Yeah, that's all. Gotta go, we have to have a reception.
That's true. That's true.
Thank you for this brilliant lecture, and
you're welcome.
greatly appreciated. I'm really curious about what motivated you to focus on this subject. Was it a secret project for a while?
Well, yeah, thank you. So how do I know about the secret library of Marie Antoinette? Did I find it in an attic or something like that? No, I mean, this is a library that's been hiding in plain sight. As I said, at the Municipal Library of Versailles and also at the French National Library. Nobody's looked into it because everybody assumes that she's stupid, so why look for her library and talk about the books that she read? What put me on the trail of this in a serious way, I kind of had, I was aware of it quite a number of years before it occurred to me that I would like to write about it, was that I was looking for something, I was looking for topics that my students could write on in a freshman seminar. And I was just going through, and I was looking at bibliographies, and I was going on Gallica, which is the site at the French National Library that has it's a catalog of a lot of books that they have digitized. And at one point, I found in the 19th century, a few librarians published some of the catalogs that I showed you in manuscript. They didn't give much commentary about it, so there are no scholarly studies of these books. But what put me on the trail was I believed all that stuff too about Marie Antoinette being intellectually challenging. Why would I think any differently? That's what I had always heard. So what really motivated me here, and what continues to motivate me to do this work, is that it really bothers me when somebody is the victim of rumors, of untrue rumors. And we're all in a position to defend ourselves when somebody tells a story about us that isn't true. But dead people cannot do that, right? And I don't think that it's any more okay to, I'm sorry to be moralistic about this, but I don't think it's any more okay to spread a rumor about a dead person than it is to spread a rumor about a living person. In fact, I think it's actually worse because that person cannot defend themselves. So as I've said before, I've become really emotionally involved in all of this. In fact, I gave the provost a few paragraphs to read in case I got so choked up that I couldn't finish. No, it's true. It's true. I mean, he can show it to you. He can show it to you. Because when I was rehearsing this lecture, I was losing it, a few times. So I am really emotionally invested in this. And yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Two items. First, Ron, I just want to thank you for sharing with us your learning, your passion for secrets, for your love of books, and for letting us in on all these secrets about Marie Antoinette's library. There is a reception upstairs. I hope you will all join us. We can continue the conversation. And as Marie Antoinette did not say, let us eat cake. Thank you all.
That was really splendid.